Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kento Tsuyama. I'm from Fishery Product Trade Office, Fisheries Agency of Japan. So now I'd like to talk about Japan Catch Documentation Scheme, so-called CDS, under Act on Ensuring the Proper Domestic Distribution and Importation of Specified Aquatic Animals and Plants. Next slide, please. So the presentation is divided into 4 sections, as you can see in the slide. Next. Let me start with a background and objective of Japan Catch Documentation Scheme. Next, please. As you may know very well, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, so-called IUU fishing, constitutes one of the most serious threats to the sustainable use of fishery resources. Preventing IUU catches from entering the supply chain is recognized as an effective measure to combat IUU fishing. To fulfill Japan's responsibility as one of the world's largest importers of fishery products, Japan will introduce a legislation act on ensuring the proper domestic distribution and importation of specified aquatic animals and plants to prevent import of IUU catches into Japan. And Japan will contribute to global efforts to eliminate IUU fishing. Next, please. The act is scheduled to enter into force on December 1st, 2022. So 4 months have left until the day of enforcement. The act consists of 2 separate measures to regulate IUU catches: regulation on Japanese domestic markets and import regulation. The regulation on Japanese domestic market is to address the issue of illegal fishing in Japan. To stop domestic distribution of illegal catches taken in Japan, and also to stop exportation of those illegal catches from Japan, the regulation of Japanese domestic market requires that certain fishery products, such as sea cucumbers and abalone, shall not be distributed in Japan without a catch number and transaction records, and shall not be exported from Japan without a legal harvest certificate. Japan called those fishery products Class 1 aquatic animals and plants, and it is defined as a group of aquatic animals and plants designated to be particularly vulnerable to illegal fishing in Japan and in need for conservation and management measures. This Class 1 is just for your information as background of the act, and this measure does not require foreign governments to take any procedures. Next slide, please. Sorry, please remain, sorry. Thank you. The import regulation, on the other hand, is a catch documentation scheme, and what Japan asks for your cooperation to combat IUU fishing. The rest of today's presentation will be about this catch documentation scheme, or CDS. It is developed based on the EU catch certification scheme, which was introduced in 2010. Next, please. Japan's catch documentation scheme, or Japan CDS, requires that Class 2 aquatic animals and plants shall not be imported into Japan without a catch certificate, which is issued by the flag state of the vessel who catches Class 2 aquatic animals and plants. Class 2 is defined as a group of aquatic animals and plants which are designated to be particularly vulnerable to IUU fishing by foreign flag vessels under foreign laws or international conservation and management measures. The catch certificate must validate that fish are caught in accordance with applicable laws, regulations, and international conservation and management measures. Next slide, please. So now let us move on to introduction of schedule, focusing on the CDS, the import regulation. Next slide, please. The bill for the act was unanimously passed at an extraordinary session of the Diet. The act was promulgated or officially announced on 11th of December in 2020. Japan made a TBT notification on December 16th to let WTO members know adoption of the act in the same year. Then, in the following year, 2021, several task force meetings were held from May to August. In those meetings, stakeholders discussed how the scheme be developed in detail, including designated species of the act. Fisheries Agency of Japan developed the scheme and held online briefing sessions for embassies in Tokyo in January and March. We also notified the WTO of the designated species through TBT notification in January. Ministerial ordinance, which stipulates outline of the scheme and the designated species, were announced on April 26, and it was notified to the WTO in accordance with WTO import licensing agreement in last June. Toward the date of enforcement, December 1st, Japan has been conducting email-based bilateral consultations with each country, as you see in the red box with red font. Next slide, please. So, from this slide, 9 out of 36, I would like to explain brief outline of the Japan catch documentation scheme. Next, please. Before going into the outline, let me introduce a document, technical note on Class 2 aquatic animals and plants. Content of this presentation, including outline of the Japan CDS and details on the implementation, are covered by this technical note. It is posted on the website of the Fisheries Agency of Japan, as well as CFDEC website. You must read this document in order to understand the export process of Class 2 to Japan after December 1st, 2022. Next, please. Let's move on to the outline of the Japan CDS. This figure shows a simple flowchart of Japan CDS. The details will be provided at later stage of this presentation. Basically, exporter will apply for the catch certificate to government agency or competent authority of the government of flag state, which will verify, validate, and issue the catch certificate, and the exporter will send issued certificate to the importer, and the importer submit the certificate to clear the Japanese customs and import designated fishery products. Next, please. I would like to talk about species which are subject to the scheme. 4 species, squid and cuttlefish, Pacific saury, mackerel, and sardine were designated as Class 2. Just remember, Class 2 is defined as a group of aquatic animals and plants which are designated to be particularly vulnerable to IUU fishing by foreign flagged vessels under foreign laws or international conservation and management measures. The catch certificate must validate that fish are caught in accordance with applicable laws, regulations, and international conservation and management measures. The designation of these 4 species were based on recommendation of the task force on a scheme of ensuring the proper distribution of fishery products, which consists of various stakeholders, and then based on advice of the Fisheries Policy Council. They are scheduled to be reviewed every 2 years or so. Japan also requires that catch certificate for fishery products that are made of or made from those species, such as fillet fish and canned fish. Next, please. For simplicity and easiness for business operators or import practice, items subject to the scheme are based on statistical code for import of Japan's tariff schedule. The table shows those items. Next, please. This is continued from the previous slide. Next, please. And the last, as you see, the prepared fishery products also require a catch certificate. Next slide, please. Japan regards the items for the statistical code numbers surrounded by the blue line as processed products. It is important to notice this because if the fish are processed in a third country, another document such as processing statement is also required in addition to the catch certificate when those fishery products are imported into Japan. Such document will be explained at later slide. Next, please. So this is also continued from the previous slide. Next, please. The table is shown the technical notes, so please refer to the technical notes. Next, please. Now, I would like to explain about the catch certificate. This is a sample form of the catch certificate, and it is attached to the technical note. The exact format for export to Japan will be discussed and confirmed between flag state and Japan in bilateral consultation and flag state notification. I'm going to talk about the bilateral consultation and flag state notification after explaining catch certificate briefly. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce information to be provided in a catch certificate. Validating authority, fishing vessel information, product information, applicable fisheries resource management, master of the fishing vessel, transshipment at sea, transshipment within the port area, exporter, flag state authority validation, transport details, importer declaration, and import control authority are to be provided. I will introduce flow of making the catch certificate based on this slide. Exporter will request the master of fishing vessel to fill in 2, 3, 4, and 5, which are fishing vessel information, product information, applicable fisheries resource management, and master of the fishing vessel. Or exporter can fill in 2, 3, 4, which are fishing vessel information, product information, applicable fisheries resource management, for the sake of fishing vessel master based on the information provided by the master. Exporter will fill out 8 and 10, which are exporter information, and transport details. In the case that transshipment was conducted at sea, 6 transshipment at sea will be filled out. And in the case that transshipment was conducted within a port area, 7 transshipment within a port area will be filled out. An applicant of the CAT certificate makes sure those pieces of information are filled correctly, and upon receiving an application, a competent authority of the flag state will confirm and verify the information. The authority is responsible for confirming all the required information is filled in. When the authority of the flag state verifies all of the necessary information, the authority will fill in 1 validating authority, then sign and validate 9 of flag state authority validation, and issue the CAT certificate. Before Class 2 fishery products are imported into Japan, importers shall fill in 11 importer declaration and submit the certificate to the Japan Customs. Next slide, please. So this is another sample, simplified CAT certificate for small-scale fishing vessels. This is also attached to the technical note. If certain requirement is met, this simplified certificate can be used. Let me explain about this in next slide. A simplified CAT certificate may be used if fish are caught by small-scale fishing vessels that meet one of 4 criteria, and the fish are landed in the flag state of those vessels, and the fish together constitute 1 consignment. The 4 criteria for small-scale fishing vessels in this scheme are as follows. Overall length of the vessel is less than 12 meters, and it does not have any towed gears. Overall length of the vessel is less than 8 meters with towed gear. The vessel does not have a superstructure, or the vessel weighs less than measured 20 gross tonnage. These criteria are the same as those of EU CAT certification scheme. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to explain what a bilateral consultation and flag state notification are, in which form and content of the CAT certificate will be discussed, confirmed, and notified. To ensure the effectiveness of the CAT documentation scheme, it is essential that the flag state that issues the CAT certificate has a sufficient system in place to attest the veracity of the information on the legality of the fishery products. For this purpose, states or regions which export Class 2 fishery products to Japan need to notify Japan of some relevant information, such as national arrangements for implementation, control, and enforcement of relevant laws, information on the competent authorities, and so on. In this procedure, first, a flag state will send its draft flag state notification to Japan. Based on the draft, the flag state and Japan will have bilateral consultations to discuss and confirm the content of the notification. After the conclusion of the bilateral consultation, the flag state will send the formal flag state notification to Japan through the diplomatic channel, and Japan will issue a letter that acknowledges the flag state of the receipt. So this notification is not required for each individual export, but needs to be provided by the flag state before the day of enforcement, December 1st, 2022 in order not to stop the export of Class 2 when introducing Japan's catch documentation scheme. The flag state also needs to notify when the information on the original notification is changed or modified. Next slide, please. Contents to be consulted, confirmed, and notified as flag state notification are shown in this slide. National arrangements for implementation, control, and enforcement of laws, regulations, which regulate IUU fishing, and conservation and management measure, which must be complied with by its fishing vessels. Information on the competent authorities that are empowered to implement each action of manage registration of fishing vessels under its flag, grant, suspend, or withdraw of fishing licenses to its fishing vessels, implement, control, and enforcement relevant laws, regulations, and conservation and management measures against their fishing vessels, and verify information in and subsequently validate the catch certificate, and format of the catch certificate, and use of electronic means if applicable. These are the contents. Next slide, please. This is an example of competent authorities information to be included in a flag state notification. Sample format of flag state notification is attached to the technical note, so please refer to the document again. Next slide, please. This is the last page of section 3, outline of Japan CDS, page 28 of 36. Let me say English needs to be used for relevant documents, such as the flag state notification, the catch certificate, and other relevant documents, which will be explained in later slides. Languages other than English can also be used with the condition that corresponding English is written next to the original text or English translated version of the exact same format is attached. I have introduced this because some countries seem to hesitate or need time because of the use of language. As long as corresponding English is written and Japan customs can understand, use of other language is acceptable. Next, please. So, finally, I would like to introduce details on the implementation of the Japan CDS. In this last section, I will introduce the important required documents other than the catch certificate in Japan CDS. Here, two main patterns of export of Class 2 fishery products are assumed. This figure shows their flaws. One is direct export from flag state to Japan, and the other is indirect export via a third country to Japan. In the case of indirect export, Japan can be a flag state. In this case, Japan will need to validate and issue the catch certificate. Next, please. This slide provides flow of direct export. In this case, catch certificate, which is verified, validated, and issued by the competent authority of flag state, will be submitted. I would like you to pay attention to the color of the arrows here. The green arrows indicates the flow of the catch certificate, and the thick white arrow indicates the movement of the fishery products. Let me explain briefly. First, an exporter procures Class 2 designated fish species and the relevant information provided by the master of a fishing vessel. Second, the exporter applies for the catch certificate and receives the certificate which is verified, validated, and issued by competent authority of flag state. Third, the certificate is transmitted to an importer with the product to Japan. And fourth, it is submitted to the Japan customs by the importer. The products will be distributed into Japanese market after the custom checks the certificate and approves it. Next, please. In this direct export from flag state to Japan, the catch certificate is required, but not other documents such as processing statement for Japan CDS. Next, please. On the other hand, additional documents will be required other than the catch certificate in the case of indirect export via a third country. This slide provides flowchart of indirect export. Next, please. In this case, both catch certificate by flag state and additional documents by third country are required. As you see in the middle of this chart, the processing in the third country takes place. In this case, additional documents issued by authority of the third country will be needed at the Japan customs as well as the catch certificate. In the next slide, I'm going to talk about the additional documents required to be submitted in case of indirect export. There are two patterns: A, processed in a third country, and B, not processed in a third country. If products are imported into Japan after being processed in a third country, a document such as processing statement is required. Such document must indicate that the processed products have been processed in that third country. In the processing statement, the information on 1 to 5 will be required. On the other hand, if the products are imported into Japan without being processed in a third country, the document which indicates transportation route of the products from the flag state to the third country, or document issued by the authority in a third country which provides details of the fishery product, dates of unloading and reloading, names of the vessels or other means of transport, and conditions of the product in the third country.
Some, interruptions. And I'd like to know, is everybody here aware to the speakers?
อันนี้ใครพูด If some countries, we are now on the way of presentation by Japan, can you please just mute your microphone? Yes, Japan, please continue.
Okay, let me continue. So next slide, please. Secretariat, could you move on to the next slide? Thank you. Now, I would like to introduce a special case for issuance of the processing statement. Please take note if competent organizations other than government agencies of a notifying third country will endorse and issue the document, such as processing statement. Names of such competent organizations need to be notified to Japan in flag state notification. Next slide, please. The procedures under the catch documentation scheme I have explained may be established, validated, or submitted by electronic means or be replaced by electronic traceability systems, which ensure the same level of control by authorities. If it is the case and you would like to use such electronic system, please make sure to consult with Japan in bilateral consultation and notify it in flag state notification. Next, please. Again, I would like to draw your attention to the technical note. The technical note covers all the information presented in today's slides, so please check it out carefully. If you have anything unclear with the scheme after a careful check on the document, please send an email to the contact address here. Thank you very much for your patience and listening. Thank you very much.